Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teacher Transition Expert Series. In this episode, we speak with Cedric Scott. Cedric is a former administrator who has made the transition out of the classroom. Cedric has created EDU Hustle. EDU Hustle is a place to educate, invest, and empower yourself to have all the resources that you need to make the transition and to continue living your best life in and out of the classroom. Cedric has put out a wealth of resources for teachers who are looking to make the transition and also partnered with others to make sure that you have resources to help you make that transition. So if you haven't already done so, make sure that you're following Cedric on all of his social medias and to make sure that you are subscribed to eduhustle.co. In this episode, we talk about all things that is needed to make the transition out of the classroom, tips and tricks to make your transition a reality, and the hard truths and reality of what the teacher transition process is really like. So tune in, turn it up, and as always, let's get ready to do this. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Leena Marie Saleh, the Edtech Guru. I want to thank you so much for spending time with me on this journey, for all the support that you give me, and for following along. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and let's get ready to do this. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Teacher Transition Expert Series. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Cedric Scott. He is the founder of EDU Hustle. So I want everyone to welcome Cedric. So Cedric, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate, the opportunity to join in and, share who I am, what I'm doing, and, just try to support in any way that I can with educators and folks in the community. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So we always like to start out with telling us a little bit about yourself and basically how you got to where you are today.
Definitely, yeah. So originally I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, born and raised there. Yeah, I actually left for college for the first time, which was a whole, exploratory type of adventure, I guess. Left for college, where I actually studied chemistry at HBCU, Virginia State University. Right after graduation, went into actually working in chemical industry for a little while. And then I just decided, I knew I was going to teach at some point. And I was like, well, I might as well do it while I'm younger. And made the shift. And I actually did an alternative track program for teaching, which actually brought me back down to the DMV region in Washington, D.C., where I started teaching. And from there, kind of worked my way through the ranks as an educator, teacher, instructional coach. My last school-based role was an assistant principal at an elementary school in Washington, D.C., in which case found out that I was going to be becoming a father and was like, okay, I'm going to work from home. And that's actually what prompted the shift and the transition from the school-based role into tech or education technology. And within that, I've been kind of doing that for the past 3-ish years as my son is about to be 3 coming March. So it's just been an interesting journey in being able to try to think about, well, how do I couple, the STEM background with the education aspect and passion. I think I found a couple of ways of doing so, which I'm pretty proud of. So
Yeah, and we'll dive into a little bit more about that. You're the first administrator we've actually had on our show, so we're really excited to have that. So you were in industry, then you went into education, and then you went into being obviously an AP. So talk a little bit about like that journey, and then obviously you said you were having a new baby and adding to your family. So that's kind of what made you make the shift.
yeah,
Love to just kind of dive into like a little bit. Did you have any hardships? Was it exciting? Like that sort of an aspect to kind of share with our educators.
definitely. It was a challenge in a lot of different ways, I would say. And the funny thing about it, like kind of funny, but not really, is that I had made a decision, to make the shift and pivot before a lot of things in the world kind of transpired, right? We went through the whole COVID era, still going through it now, right now, it's not gone. So still dealing with that. But then there were just a lot of different things that kind of were segues and almost like little kind of notes or flags, if you will, that kind of pointed me and kind of guided me through this direction in one way or another. So of course, finding out that I was going to be having a son, I was like, oh, okay, so I got to really take heed and really be present. And I just know how important that is, being that, I was mostly raised by my dad, but that was due to the fact that I lost my mom when I was really young, passed when I was 10 years old from breast cancer. So my dad took the reins and, I'm one of 6 children. So understanding how important that is, what he instilled in me just from his involvement and things like that in my life, and how important education is. I really took a step back and thought about it, especially being, a school administrator kind of at the helm. And for people that don't really know, shout outs to all the assistant principals because they're actually the people who are doing a lot of the running around and putting out a lot of those fires. No slight to principals, but APs really, assume a lot of that kind of grunt work in those buildings. So, dealing with that and really thinking about, well, how can I still have a hand in supporting and really, having an impact in education, which I really found to be immensely important, which was instilled in me by my mom. It really kind of really took me to really take a deep breath and assess the situation and say, well, how do I still remain a part of this and, continue to have involvement and show support of teachers too, at the same time, as well as students. And with that, it was just a matter of, well, where else is this skill set going to be viable and important? Which, of course, you look into ed tech and you start thinking about, well, what's even available, what's possible, and I went down that whole rabbit hole, the matrix as I call it, in terms of ed tech, and was able to figure out how to maneuver and use not only my skills as an educator and as a school administrator, but also as a chemist and as a scientist, the analytical and kind of data methodologies in conjunction with pedagogy. It's like, all right, things start to make sense in the line and the light bulb goes off and the rest, is kind of history, as they say.
Thank you for taking us through that journey because it's really important, I think, for people to understand that like AP work is actually, it's busy, right? Basically it's all consuming. You live, eat, breathe the school. There is not any fires that are coming, all the parents that are coming, all of those types of things. So I can definitely understand that journey. And so when you did obviously make the transition, for me, it was like, I was like spraying, praying, and I was failing multiple times. And I think everyone has like a different journey for how they move to actually the ed tech space. So do you want to take us a little bit through how your journey was finally making that decision, then actually moving into the ed tech space?
Definitely. Yeah. So I immediately, started like a lot of people do, I think, and just pulling out, well, what's even possible, right? And then just submitting a bunch of applications, just throwing it out and just keeping my information circulating, regardless of anything. I don't know if I can say this and not get in trouble, but I was at work, like, in my office during a break or something like that, and I'd be pulling up listings and stuff like that.
I don't think you're the only one.
Yeah, right. Just to see, what even was available, and even thinking about like my skill set and my credentials and things like that, and how to even align those things to what I was seeing in job descriptions and roles and expectations. Then of course the consideration for salary, because I was in Washington D.C. in D.C. public, and this is public knowledge. Assistant principals in Washington D.C. public schools make a good amount of money in comparison to the rest of the country, and educators in general, across the board there. So you have to take all those things into account, and then having a family, a home, and then of course my son coming into the world and having to consider that, childcare, all those things. So for me, it was a matter of really looking at, potential and what was already happening and seeing, well, is this even going to be a viable solution? And, throughout the course of that process, it was just kind of apply, see what comes back. And of course, you fall 100 times, right? And then at that 101, somebody's like, hey, get up. And in which case, that's kind of what happened. And, it just so happened to work out for me where it got to like the end of the school year and we had just gone remote probably around March. My son's birthday, for context, is March 27th. With that, it just so happened that a door opened and I was able to step through it and go through that progression of getting into that position. And from there, it worked out in alignment to the end of the school year where, school ended May, June. The hard part about it was ultimately having to sit on a Zoom call, and we used to do monthly town hall meetings that I would run in person while we were still in school, but we still held them virtually when the school went, fully remote. And I had to sit on the town hall meeting, and I had my son on my knee, and it was a very kind of like touching moment that I had to tell the staff that I wasn't going to be returning. It was a lot of different emotions to go along with it. Definitely, the feelings between colleagues and things like that. But then, of course, you have the students on there too and their families. We had just really built up a really solid system of relationships and things like that. 'Cause I had been at that same school for several years. I started out teaching there and then transitioned into that. So everybody kind of saw me grow up, if you will, in a way. So it was just nice to be able to make the shift and find something that was going to be solid for my family, but at the same time, you see people that you work with, you love the students. And for me, the ultimate thing was honestly thinking about, well, if I'm a teacher, I am, touching the lives of 25, 30, sometimes large classrooms, students and families. And then as I transitioned up into instructional coaching, it was like, okay, I'm working with all these teachers, which means that I'm touching the lives of all the students in their classrooms. But then being at the school administrative level, it's like, wow, 600, families are being impacted by the work I'm doing. And you really take that on and it's important to you. But I thought about that in the context of what I'm doing now, what I've been doing, which is now saying, okay, well, if I'm within one of these companies and adding in that expertise and that kind of boots on the ground knowledge, how many families and how many students can I impact now, right? It pans out that way, and you have to kind of tweak your mindset, right, to think about it in terms of exponential growth and impact. And that was kind of one of the things that kind of pushed me a little bit along to say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay. They'll still be there, and just know that you're still in the work, fighting the good fight, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of us choose to go into ed tech because we are so passionate about the work and the students and supporting the families. And, we've seen the things that we can't necessarily fix. I don't think people often think about it in that way. But like when I think about being in the ed tech space, I think that I actually have the ability to have a little bit more impact than I might even in the classroom. And it sounds like you kind of feel that same way. So you transitioned out of the classroom into a product associate. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what a product associate is, what you even do in that type of role, and then we can talk about some of the other things around the teacher transition process.
Of course, yeah. So as a product associate, for context, I was working on basically a K-12 math curriculum. This is how I break down the ed tech sector, I guess, to give people a little bit more context, if that's okay. I generally talk about it in the way that I see it is like two avenues, right? Again, going back to that matrix analogy, I talk about the two pills, right? You have the content or the curriculum side, and then you have the product side, right? The content or curriculum, as pretty people know, is the information that's going to be disseminated to whatever student, right? Whether it's a 5-year-old or a corporate employee. But then you also have the product, which is the packaging of that material and how it's, disseminated and transferred out to those people. So for me, I was working on the product side, of course, being a product associate, and what that essentially was a liaison between the curriculum team who was producing the content and then also the people who were then kind of pushing it out. So your customer success, your sales people, and basically being able to field questions and answer anything that came in inquiry wise, as far as like efficiency of the product, how good is this curriculum. So you kind of have to know both sides. You have to know like more the business side of things, but you also then have to have some content expertise. Me being in math, it was like, well, how does this content support students with disabilities or students who are English language learners or what have you, and you had to be able to break those things down, but then also look at it from the lens of, all right, can you do a guided tour of this platform for this particular customer who is just trying to figure out how to navigate this thing so that they can use it for their students, for their schools. So that's kind of the big idea of it. It was a little bit of a Swiss Army knife of a position, really, where you kind of have to be on both sides. And it's something that's, you have to really be able to think quickly on your feet, and field a lot of questions, because sometimes you'll even have questions come in directly from facilitators or people who are running professional development sessions and say, I'm in a session right now and they want to know why the units in grade 6 are in the order that they're in. And you got to be like, let me figure this out for you. So that type of thing, where you're just in the middle. It's a catch-all where you're responding to the people in the field, but then also customers themselves, teachers who have gripes and things like that.
Often when I speak with teachers, I've had many of them come to me and they're like, hey, yeah, I really just want to do product because I just want to like give feedback to the developers and I want to do those. I basically want to give them feedback on how they can improve the product. However, what you're saying is that there are many aspects to the product. You're speaking and listening to customers, you're speaking and listening to your salespeople, then you're speaking and listening to the curriculum and just trying to figure out what's the best way. And then also deciding, because dev work costs money, you have to decide which ones are the best decisions to make and why they're the best decisions to make, and making sure that everything you're doing is completely data driven, which makes sense with the math
Hmm.
piece and makes sense with your chemistry background. So it's good for you to kind of paint that picture too, because I think people often just think like, oh, it's just like this one-sided thing, but really it's kind of what you're saying, like a jack of all trades type of position, which
Yeah.
I think is good also for a teacher who can transition, and probably was really natural from you moving from the AP to
Yeah.
being a product associate. Probably was like a nice little transition for you.
Yeah. And I mean, even the application of it, really getting into thinking about even a lot of the verbiage that's used in EdTech, for example. Whereas, if you're in education, especially in a school basis, or at a district level, then you get ed speak, right? You understand what an IEP is, 504 plan. Like we understand, we speak that language. However, when you go into ed tech, then you start, for example, one of the core pieces of the work that I did as a product associate is working with RFPs, right? Requests for proposal. So not only is it you being knowledgeable in just fielding and answering direct questions that might come through Slack channels or whatever, it's also a matter of being able to look at documents, break them down, and understand what the expectations are for those things, and being able to provide written responses too. So, for different rubric and criteria that they would have coming from districts, coming from states, even looking at state standard alignments in correlation to the product, right? You have to have all of the knowledge bases there to be able to say, yes, it hits this standard and it hits it here, right? This unit, this lesson, and be able to provide evidence for those things so that
Hmm.
basically whenever the sales or customer success people go back to that potential customer, and say, hey, we have everything that you need, that they are able to basically go in and point exactly to all the evidence on the RFP, right, the request for proposal, and prove basically that this thing is going to work for these teachers, these students. So, and again, a lot of it is pretty quick paced, project driven. So, hard set deadlines are real things. um, which is kind of, I think, one thing I didn't necessarily
Hmm.
mention. I think in terms of like my segue into edtech was, and I would actually give this as a little bit of advice, would be to like actually start digging into contract work initially. So think about, what can you do alongside what you're currently doing in your 9 to 5, whether you're a teacher, administrator, what have you. How can you apply your skill set directly to supporting something that's already moving and shaking, and only for a set period of time, so that you can just kind of get your feet, but have a resume builder as well. But if you want to get into writing curriculum, maybe you look into someone who's currently producing a curriculum, and you jump on board and do some of the writing for them, and you go from there. So then you have that experience, you have the exposure, so that when you actually start applying to some of the jobs that you really want, right, career based, then it's kind of like, well, I can point to this. I've done this. I've used this particular tool, what have you. And from there, I think that kind of actually really helps and gives you a little bit of an edge in the market. So that was something that I actually did. Started out, I did some writing, review work, and it kind of kept continuing to kind of graduate within one company. When I started out, I was still the AP, but I was producing content for a chemistry course online. 'Cause naturally, they needed a subject matter expert, right, or a SME, and I was able to do that. And I think that kind of opened the doors for people to kind of see, okay, well, you have some know-how around how to apply not just technical knowledge, but also, pedagogy, and actually produce content that's going to work for students, and also do it in a quick turnaround type of basis, right? Some projects are, a month long, couple weeks, few months, depending on, what the need is. And, from there, I think it's just kind of a ladder up that can only get better, in my opinion and experience.
I agree. I've talked about this countless times now. The
Yeah.
importance of doing contract work. Andrew Webb was on, Blair Smizer Muldoon, Becca Stump, Stella came on as well. Basically, every single person talked about the importance of doing contract work. I personally didn't do contract work, but I did in a sense because I ran a meetup group called Edtech Austin. And so we had a lot of startups that would come in and we would do a lot of like focus groups and do a lot of that sort of thing. And we would kind of work with them. And sometimes we provide feedback and that same sort of thing. So I kind of had that like aspect. But for those people who are looking to transition, I can't name a better thing that you can do than by picking up contract work. One, it gives you experience and exposure to the company. Two, you have an example of what a hard deadline is. Three, you also get that example of working with the products and the tools that are used in the business side of things. And then you can be that subject matter expert SME, which people talk about those all the time. And so those are just really important. And then when you do go to do a RFP, which for those people who probably don't know what an RFP is, basically when a school district is looking to adopt a tool of some kind, it could be anything. Literally, they want to buy toilet paper, they have to do RFPs for everything. It's just how the school works. They send out a request and they say, basically they're bids. You send in bids and information, and you have to like really explain why somebody should buy this, what they can do. And school districts, some of them are insane. Some of them are the longest things you'll ever have, and some of them are super short. But you have to basically be able to really speak to those products, explain them, and exactly what Cedric just said, the pedagogical side of why you should use a product and bring it into your school and district. So all of those will lend itself to like all of those different examples of just giving you a leg up over other people, and a resume filler / builder. As a teacher, you do hundreds of things, and you do those curriculum things, but you don't know how to speak to them and position them in the way that's going to be interesting for a company to be like, oh, they definitely are an SME. I definitely can bring them into this role, and I know that they're going to thrive. And so that contract work gives you the opportunity to fill that gap, I think.
Yes, definitely. I mean, and ultimately for me, the way I view it is it's like proof of concept, honestly, because if you're a job seeker or, you run a business or whatever the case is, you're trying to sell something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this context, you're trying to sell yourself, right?
Yep.
And how you do that by basically proving. And the best type of marketing is marketing that you don't have to do yourself. If other people can say your work is good, you don't have to say anything. You just have to show up and make sure that you actually produce the high level of quality work that they stand by and they said that you can offer. Otherwise, there's a whole nother conversation that should be had. But, just in that whole vein, it's the idea of, yes, I believe I can do this versus I've done it. And it's right here. Here's the proof, right? Here's the receipts, if you will, to kind of back it up. And those people over there can tell you because I did that and it worked for them. So it'll work for you as well, which again, will only benefit you in the long run if that's not necessarily your 9 to 5 day in, day out wheelhouse of what you do. But it's just another aspect of not only am I great over here, but I also can shift and pivot and make this happen too. So hire me or it's
Yep.
your loss. That's type of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Kind of switch just like a little bit of gears, but we're still talking
yeah,
about the teacher transition process. So you and I actually met through doing Clubhouse, which we'll talk a little
mhm,
bit about that. But currently you, as I mentioned at the very beginning, have a website and basically brand, EDU Hustle. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that, and then we can dive into like all the powers of networking and all the different things like that.
sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of Edu Hustle, it actually came out of, I don't want to call it disparity or despair, but I was traveling for work and I returned home and found out that I had COVID. So, you know, the company was good enough to put me up in a hotel for 2 weeks. Sadly, I had to be away from my wife and my son during that time. But I thought, well, how can I leverage and use this time for something of benefit that's going to help other people? And I thought about, well, who needs help? And consistently, I thought about and heard from and spoke with educators, right? There was a need. So what I basically did was I started doing rooms on Clubhouse, as you mentioned. And at that point, it wasn't like a branded thing. I was just doing it and helping educators and sharing a bunch of resources. And it was job related stuff, but also, folks who are entrepreneurs and create products. And it was just like promotion, and it was a party, right? And from that, I was like, you know what? This needs to be something else. And people started telling me, man, you need to like create some type of collective group or something where people can congregate together rather than having this random kind of hodgepodge of these rooms on Clubhouse. And I was like, okay. So I created a Facebook group, called it Edu Hustle. And from there, it just kind of, upward trajectory, got people who were sharing information, resources. And just for context, the mission of Edu Hustle is to help educators maximize their time, talent, and earning potential. And those were the three key components for me as I was thinking just within my transition and everything that I was doing. Those were the three things that I needed to maintain, right? The time, being, a family man and wanting to be around and be present. That was number one. I used to drive an hour in the morning to work, almost 2 hours in the evening. There was no way I was going to spend 3 hours in my car away from my son and my wife. Talent. Educators are extremely talented people just by nature, right? We can do a lot of stuff, right? We're artistic, everything. So maximizing that, how can you leverage those skills? Of course, the earning potential You got to live, right? We have to make a respectable living, but we all understand how disrespected the salary and wage issues are when we talk about how educators are paid. So those three things were highlighted, and yeah, just continue to build it out and grow from there. Bring people into the Facebook group, run different rooms on Clubhouse, and just continue to support and just listen to educators. Like, what do you need? What's the problem? What are we seeing right now? Staying abreast of what's going on, reading articles and things like that, and just pulling in as many resources and different components that I thought would make sense. And yes, since then, let's see, as of November 22nd, I officially got the registered trademark for it and everything like that. So it was like, really pretty serious about it. And then now it's just continually growing and just thinking about, again, same thing. How can we support? And then the three main goals for this year, I had three goals last year. I just doubled down on them for this year, for 2023. Help 10 educators make $100, help 10 educators make $1,000, and help 10 educators land new jobs. Sorry, those were the goals from last year. This year, it's 2020. Same thing. So really just thinking about people who want to stay in the classroom, how can we support with them? And if they want to do something on the side, create something else for themselves, build something out. But then for the people who do want to transition and see what else is out there, there's assistance and support for them too. So a lot of collaborative efforts with folks like yourself, where we just are genuinely just trying to help each other, because nobody helps educators like educators, period.
Nope, that community is just, there's just something really unique about the education community, I think. When you were doing the Clubhouse stuff, that was like the height and heyday of Clubhouse. I'm not saying that Clubhouse isn't still there, but I would say at that time you had like superintendents that were coming in and sharing like their hardships and woes. And you heard people talking about RFPs, and you heard the special ed teams talking about how ed tech products were missing certain components, and you could learn. It was amazing. I learned so much from people that just hanging out, just like not even really speaking. So there's just a power and importance of networking. And so you said you built your community, you have the Clubhouse rooms. So if you were an educator and you were looking to either find other teacherpreneurs or try to have a hustle on the side or transition, where would you tell them to kind of start that journey?
Well, I mean, shameless plug, you can go to eduhustle.co.
That's a good plug. It's a good place to go.
That works. But yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of, I guess, looking at networking spaces, there still is pretty solid education community on Clubhouse. There's a few rooms. There's one hosted by Giancarlo Brato. I think that's usually like 9:30 a.m. Eastern-ish. And I frequent that space, and it's amazing. And I believe the club's called Education Catalyst, I believe. So that's kind of where I've gotten a lot of great information and insights and met a lot of different people, different networks. So there, I mean, of course, LinkedIn, there are some groups on LinkedIn as well, focusing on transitioning educators, exiting educators, things like that. So I would definitely, rub elbows into those groups and just kind of see, what people are talking about when information is being shared. So those are some definitely some different resources and spaces. In terms of even like the ed tech kind of overall idea, the one resource that I always point people to is EdSurge. It's like my favorite ed tech based platform ever, because you're going to get a lot of information through means of articles, data, a lot of information that's just coming out from a lot of different spaces. But then also there's a job board there, which to me I think really removes a lot of fluff that you might see on other job boards related to what you might want to do in education, and kind of breaks things down. So yeah, I would definitely kind of highlight those particular resources and spaces. But I would also just think about, honestly, like, pick up your phone and kind of scroll through and see who do you know who can speak directly to your situation, number one, but then also potentially what it is that you might want to do, right? I just don't think there's any trade-off for folks that you already have a relationship with, and that there's not going to be anything in addition to them sharing resources, sharing information, or just having a conversation with you. And I would just start there. Outside of that, I know a lot of amazing people in the education space, particularly through like LinkedIn. They'll offer coffee chats, which are just kind of like free little calls we can jump on and talk and just share insights, information. And usually those don't have like any type of hidden agenda from the people that I know who really do the work. I've met some amazing folks, and just and begun offering stuff like that for myself, and just like, look, this is what's possible. Here's some information. And then even a lot of people will even send you like a follow-up email, like say, hey, this is what we talked about. You can look at these resources outlined here. they might offer a service, but there's never a push to be like, oh, buy my stuff. Like people don't really do that if they're really about what they say they're about. So just hopefully those things help, but that's what's worked for me.
I think those are really good directions to point people to. And one thing that you mentioned that I don't think a lot of people mention is just your personal network. And we're not
Hmm.
talking about like cold outreach of other people, but exactly what you said, pick up your phone and see people who work in different industries. I know that I have a ton of friends who work all over in event planning, in marketing, in whatever. And so just being able to pick their brains about what they do in a day to day is actually really important because it might be like, oh, no,
Hmm.
absolutely, that's not for me. Or, oh, heck yes, that's exactly what I want to be doing. That can also guide you too, especially when you're feeling lost. Cause like as educators who do thousands of
Hmm.
things, it's really hard to know a direction sometimes where to go. And I think that's a really great way to like do it. And really it's not uncomfortable. It's not really uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to ask the question about what they're doing, but not the same as like a cold outreach, like me reaching out to you. I
Yeah.
never met you before and be like, hey, that is a little bit more intimidating than reaching out to your personal network. So I really like what you said there. We didn't really talk too much about this, but there's somebody that you partner with and work with for resumes. And we've talked about this before with people just going cold to resume writers who don't work with teacher transitioners. And when I get the resumes to look at them, there's no teaching history. It's actually gone. It's like erased, which I can't really fathom that. But maybe you could speak a little bit to the importance of how to select a resume writer. Obviously, you offer one on your page, and just why you need to work with one that helps teacher transitioners.
Just give a quick shout out to Tyrena Laster at T Laster Services. She's amazing. With that, just the selection of, and this, I think this also can kind of coincide. And I don't want to step on anybody's toes or be disrespectful, but with like the whole like career coaching thing too, I think a lot of these things have some overlap where what you might find is that generally resume writing or career services, if you will, want to call it that, there might be like more of a general basis. However, in terms of educators, especially folks who are looking to transition, it's different. Right? So it's a different kind of animal, honestly, to be able to understand and kind of harness and leverage, what we call the transferable skills of an educator, to then use that verbiage to frame it in a way that anyone in any industry who would read it would understand and make sense of it, right? Because again, going back to what I was mentioning before with ed speak versus language and ed tech, it's like being bilingual, right? Like not everybody is going to speak Spanish, right? I.e., ed speak. So somebody might get that your resume or what have you, and maybe they work for an ed tech company and they're doing the hiring, but maybe they don't have an education background because contrary to popular belief, not everybody that works in ed tech actually has an education background. So
Hmm.
with that in mind, it has to be kind of universal language. And I think that it's important to kind of look into that aspect and see, well, can this person, can this entity, can this company, when they're producing these materials for me, not only take what I have done and transfer and transition and change the verbiage so that other people understand it, but can they actually highlight it and heighten it to make it pop off the page? Because again, educators, you wear 1,000 hats. Like so if they can't necessarily take those hats and I guess to use, kind of an education based term, differentiate it so that it makes sense and transfers into that next context, that might not necessarily be the service for you, right? So again, proof of concept. I mean, if you, and one piece of advice I would say is if you're considering somebody doing your resume, ask them, have they helped teachers transition? Right? Do they have examples? Because I know, a lot of different people, they will tell you, yes, I have, and I can share, an actual draft of one and show you what it looks like and also point directly to like client testimonials, which was really one of the things that stood out to me about Tyrena Lassiter. In her work, she's mentioned on the EDU Hustle site, and I partnered with her about it at T Lassiter Services. And the one thing that really jumped out initially was the amount of transitioning teachers or transitioning educators who had testimonials that said this was the result that I got from going through this process or working with this service or what have you. And then also again, kind of to your point, the education experience not being buried, right? And kind of being like pushed down. It's more so like, well, how can we lift this up and actually speak directly to the strength of this particular role, right? If you were, an administrator, that means that you dealt within the business of education, right? Because I think a lot of times as well, there's this kind of a a misnomer about education from, I think, from the outside world looking at us, where it's kind of like education is a system. Yes, but education is an industry, and it's a very viable, growing, expanding industry that is it's not going anywhere, clearly. So how can the people who are providing the services for you, even if they're doing like some type of interview prep or something like that, how can they support you in that transition and understanding that you have knowledge of course, the whole idea of system based learning, whatever, but then how that actually can then relate into the business world. Because let's just to be completely honest, ed tech companies, they are essentially selling products, usually what happens. And who are they selling the products to? Folks like us. So do they understand, the career coaches, the resume writers, what have you, do they understand that you're actually valuable as an asset to a company because
Mm-hmm.
you are kind of like their target customer. So, I mean, think about the benefit of having somebody who you would sell something to actually on staff. It's like having a ringer in a game. So, yeah, in a long roundabout way, I would say that that's how I would break that down, and just get the proof of concept. Have they done it before? Is it possible? And if that's in place and comfortable, then it might be worth a shot.
Yep. Completely agree. Okay, so we've talked and covered a gamut of things, and we've talked about some ways to like vet resources, figure out your community, and all those types of things. So, to round out today, can you share some tips and tricks for teachers that you feel like your absolute must do's for a teacher to really make their transition a reality?
So, first thing, I would really kind of begin to kind of nail down what, I guess, pathway you want to kind of take. I mentioned before about if we're talking about ed tech in particular, content versus product side, like where do you see yourself? That's probably the first question I ask people when I talk to them. Because honestly, if you just decide to like jump off the ledge like I did, then you're gonna be just kind of floating in this world of extremes, right? It's a really big idea to where it's like, well, where do I start? Right. And
Mhm.
what does this mean? And how do I even break this stuff down and understand it? So think about it that way. Do you want to create the thing or do you want to sustain the thing? Kind of, I guess, to put it that way. So once you kind of have that pathway, you're thinking like, this is where I'm really interested in, this is my passion, then maybe consider what are kind of the competencies that you would need to be able to do that effectively. And of course, looking at different job titles and descriptions and things like that could help, but just kind of thinking like, what are the core things, essential functions of that world? What do you need to know, right? Especially if you're going to think about, like, for example, going into content or curriculum, are you focusing on one particular type of discipline, right? Are you math? And if you're focusing on math, what level? Because you might be K-12, but you might really be solid in elementary, or breaking things down to that. Because the more granular you get, I think the tighter the funnel becomes whenever you begin to start searching, and you're not looking, all over the world. You're like, no, this is my lane. I'm here. And then also, again, going back to even like the networking piece, who do you know, or also who have you seen who has success within that particular aspect of where you are trying to go, right? In that wheelhouse, can you have some type of community within that space? Again, going back to elementary math, people who are in that space who work for companies related to that, or even have connections that could then talk to about it. And I think one of the big questions that we really have to ask early on, and I had to find this out kind of early in my career, was do you really want to leave teaching or do you want to leave the school or district that you're in?
Such a good
Like
point.
that, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of times it's like, I'm over it, I'm done. And they want to just, not they, but because I was there too. Same thing.
Yep.
I was like, I'm ready to go. And you might just need to transition your environment and then stay within doing what you love, and just kind of shift, right? You might just have a toxic work environment, or a bad administrator. It happens. What have you. So those would be the questions I would think about early on, and then once you kind of start digging and peeling the layers back, then things will start to make a little bit more sense. And then one of the, I guess, more proactive or application based kind of steps to take within that kind of granular scheme is then, of course, thinking about, well, is there contract work available in this particular thing, to even make sure that that's truly where you want to go, right? So example again, elementary math, I want to write content. If you can get on board with somebody and actually produce it, maybe you get in there and you say, you know what, this is not for me. I don't like it. Then you might try something else. But if you get in there and you say, oh, this is great, then you can consider, okay, well, what is available, more long term, in the grand scheme of things. So those will be kind of the, good pathway steps to kind of take it, and that's what I would do if, I were to do it again. But for me, I was like most people, I was like, I got to get out. I got to make it happen. I got to do other things. When you're not really thinking necessarily, just about like yourself, and you're really focusing on the supports that you have to provide for other people and things like that. And you might not necessarily be thinking as, we'll say, clearly, but at the end of the day, if you are able to do that, just take a step back. And I mean, the last thing, honestly, in conjunction with all that stuff, is breathe. Like, just really, take time to, really consider, where you are in your space, just kind of get as grounded and centered as possible, because probably going to be a whirlwind, probably going to be a rocky kind of journey. But if you can have those moments where you can stay solid and grounded in yourself, and I know that sounds kind of like, oh, meditation, or doesn't have to be any of that stuff. It's just, for example, for me, you talk about self-care and stuff, like I have to work out. It's a thing. You're somebody like that, then do those things, but just make sure that those other things are in alignment, because this is a whole nother beast, that you're going to undertake. Not to discourage anybody, because I mean, plenty of people do it, but it becomes, we'll say, in the great
It's
words of,
mentally taxing, right?
yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
think about Nipsey Hustle. I got back here, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. Simplest way I can put it.
Yep. Exactly all the things that you just said. And being as granular as possible is actually one of the better things. It's not that you can't explore other options before, but it's already a daunting, very tedious, time consuming process that if you can have a funnel and a vision for where you're going, it's much easier. It's like if you just got in your car and just started driving, but didn't know where you were going, there's so many roads that can take you different ways. But if you know where you're going and you know how to get there, it's going to be much easier than if I just am driving, just hoping to try to get to a location without knowing exactly where I'm going to go. So it
Yeah.
it's an important aspect in what you're saying, that contract work. And then I also say just like even volunteering or leading a clubhouse room, or I don't know, helping to moderate a chat, or like any of those types of things are also good experiences that are low risk. And what you said, networking, and LinkedIn is amazing for that you can filter and search for somebody who was a teacher and who was, who does elementary math, and that type of an aspect is pretty important. Thank you so much, Cedric, for coming on, sharing your expertise and your knowledge. You can find all of Cedric's details below, but definitely you can find him at eduhustle.co for a lot of information, and find everything about his podcast and all the other resources and things that he shares. Definitely recommend it. So Cedric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And yeah, good luck to everybody, and wishing everybody the best, this year and every year going forward. Thanks for having me so much. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. And we will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much. You've made it this far. We are so thankful that you're here. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, comment below, and join us for all of our next videos. Thank you so much for joining us as we disrupt education together. See you guys soon. Bye, everybody.